Be seated. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has expressed concern because I got sick. I wasn't that sick, but thank you. And I'm feeling much better. I appreciate it very much. So there is one of these stories or ideas or images that we see again and again and again all the time. Those kinds of images where we see them all the time, they become what we might call a cliche, where we hear about the idea or the story, we say, just start the story and say, oh, I know that story, I've heard it 1,000 times, right? That would be a cliche. And one of the cliches that we sometimes hear about nowadays is about a guy that I will name Uncle Fred. And Uncle Fred comes to Thanksgiving dinner, and people always ask, why did you invite Uncle Fred to Thanksgiving dinner? And they say, he's family, you have to invite him to Thanksgiving dinner. And when Uncle Fred comes to Thanksgiving dinner, after a couple of glasses of wine, then Uncle Fred starts to get going. And for heaven's sake, don't get Uncle Fred going, because he is going to rip and roar and rant and rave about something or other that's horrible in the government or the country or the world or whatever. It does not matter who's in charge. Doesn't matter who's in the White House. Doesn't matter which party controls Congress. Uncle Fred is going to have something about it, and it's going to ruffle everybody's feathers. Why can't we just have Thanksgiving dinner like normal? Well, the gospel lesson for today, Jesus is invited to a dinner. And Jesus turns out to be a little bit like Uncle Fred. He ruffles some feathers. So, for example, in the verses that we skip, because if you look at the Bible passage numbers in there, we actually skip some verses in the gospel lesson for today. In the verses that we skip, Jesus heals a man who has a condition called edema, right? Yeah, edema. And that's where your limbs or parts of your body swell up because there's too much water in between the cells. If you know anybody that has ever had edema, or if you've ever had edema yourself, you know it is no fun at all. Well, Jesus is there at this dinner. It's Sunday dinner. It's Sabbath dinner. And there's a guy there with edema. And he looks at the folks around him. It is a leader of the Pharisees who's invited him. So they are very particular about God's law. We'll get back to that in a minute, briefly. He looks at everybody around him. This is not uncommon for him to be at dinner with Pharisees. They would invite him to dinner. He's done it twice already in the Gospel of Luke. He looks at people around him and he says basically the same thing he said last week. He says, if your donkey falls in a well, we're back to the donkeys again. If your donkey falls in the well, you're going to pull them out on the Sabbath day. So why can't I heal this man on the Sabbath? Now the obvious answer would be, because if the donkey doesn't get out of the well, the donkey's going to drown, and this guy can wait till Monday. That's why. But Jesus is not here to cut tiny little bitty bits of subtlety into the law. He is trying to make a point about God's law, which is that the law of God, its purpose is not to control and not to manipulate and not to keep anybody in particular in power, but rather for the purpose of nurturing and making a space for and encouraging human healing and wholeness and life and connection and relationship. That's what it's for. And also when we fall away from human healing and wholeness and life and connection and relationship, to show us there is something better and that we need God to bring us back. We need the power of Jesus at his cross to bring us back, which Jesus does. This is what the law is for. So Jesus heals this man with edema. Nobody peeps a peep. Nobody objects. Nobody agrees. It is a tense moment at the dinner table. Uncle Fred has ruffled our feathers. Then Jesus sees everybody coming in to dinner, and trying to get into the most prominent places, the places that are closest to the host or to the guest of honor. Now, this was serious business, y'all, okay? A dinner in those days was like reality TV is today. Everybody watched. It was a public event. It wasn't just a private thing. They were up there in their courtyard, and people were standing around on the outside to watch, to see who got to sit where, who got to sit at the cool kids table, who spoke to the host and the host would speak back, who made a joke and the guest of honor laughed. All of that would make you a little bit higher in the level of prestige in the village. It's like middle school, right? It's just like middle school. A little bit higher in the prestige in your class. So then, if you had more prestige in the village, you would be more likely to get good terms on a loan. It was like your credit rating. You would be more likely to have somebody join you in a business venture. People would believe you when you told your side of the story. If you had a high status rating, you could negotiate a better marriage contract for your son or your daughter or yourself. This was serious business. I'll scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. Jesus tells them a parable. Now, a parable is a story that Jesus tells us to show us what God is like. Okay? So in a couple of weeks, we're going to hear a couple of parables that some of us may have heard before. For example, one popular parable is the parable of the Good Shepherd. God is like a good shepherd. God, when we get lost, God searches and searches and searches and searches to find us, and God brings us home. This is what God is like. Or, immediately after that parable of the Good Shepherd, Jesus also tells the parable of the lost coin, where God is like a woman who has lost her coin. And she searches and searches and searches and searches for you and me when we get lost. And when she finds us, God calls all of her friends and relatives together, and they have a grand party. They are delighted. This is what God is like. Okay, gospel lesson for today. Jesus tells a parable. Here's what God is like. God sits at the lower end of the table. And he quotes this passage from Proverbs where Lady Wisdom tells us, don't be scrambling for the highest position at the table. Sit down at the lowest position. Be humble. Jesus concludes his parable by saying, those who exalt themselves will be humbled. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. Humility? Not a popular virtue nowadays, is it? Too often, humility is interpreted as weakness. You're too weak to engage in the competition. You're too weak to play the game of glitz and glam. You need to get out there and show yourself. Humility is too often misinterpreted as a form of cowardice. What are you, afraid of getting into the rat race? What are you, too lazy to participate in the glitz and the glam? Humility is often interpreted to mean that you will let people walk all over you like a doormat. This is not the case at all. Humility comes from the same root as the word human. Humble, human, humus. Humus is dirt, soil. The first creation story, God makes us out of soil and creates us, molds us, the second creation story, molds us out of the soil and breathes the breath of life into us, which is more than just breath, just of air. It is the Spirit of God. It's the same word, Rutrough. God breathes God's own Spirit into us. And this is who we are. We are human. In the first creation story, God makes us male and female in God's image. Male, female, if we got some mixed in between, that's okay too. And we are all made in God's image, okay? That's what it means to be human. Our dignity Our value, our worth comes from God as human beings. It does not come from how much money we have, or from how pretty we are, or from how young we are, or how old we are, or how popular we are, whether we get to sit at the cool kids table or not the cool kids table. It doesn't come from anything like that. It doesn't come even from how intelligent we are. All those things are fine. There's nothing wrong with those other things. It's just that they are tools that God gives to us to help us to care for one another and ourselves and creation and to celebrate life. That's what all those things are for, and that's okay. But our dignity does not come from there. Our dignity comes from God who made us from the dawn of time. It cannot be taken away. Even when we dishonor the dignity with which God has made us, or dishonor the dignity in which God has made someone else by treating them badly or treating ourselves badly, even when we forget the image of God, God still comes to us and searches and searches and searches and searches and finds us and brings us back. This is what it means to be baptized. Every day, God turns us back towards God's life, God's hopes, God's dreams. So we are free. We can be a part of the game of glitz and glam to whatever degree is necessary for us to care for each other and ourselves in creation. But we are not bound to it. We can be ourselves. We can be human. Jesus is a little bit like Uncle Fred. And then Jesus says to his host, now Uncle Fred's now talking to the host. Now sometimes Uncle Fred might be able to get away with talking to the host, but if he starts talking to the hostess, I don't know, man. Uncle Fred is walking on the edge then. He says to the host, he says, when you give a dinner, don't invite your rich neighbors and your friends and relatives, he says. Now, a dinner, again, was like a reality show. It was serious business. And the deal was that you would invite your friends and rich relatives and everybody to your dinner, and you would give them some prestige, some honor in the village by letting them sit next to you or laughing at their jokes and so on and so forth, like we said before. So they can get loans and business partnerships and all that. Okay. Then the deal was they would invite you, and then you could bolster your prestige by where you sat at the dinner, or how you were treated at the dinner, and thereby your prestige would be gained or higher or else upheld. And it was kind of like a social network, you know? It was like the good old boys system. And you got into the good old boys system, you invited each other back and forth because you were rich enough to do that, which most people weren't, and you were maintained in your position, your status, village. And Jesus says that is not the way God works. I'll scratch your back. You'll scratch mine. You do something for me, I'll do something for you. That's not what we're about. We might have to participate in the networks and the games of our world, but what we are about is resurrection. We are about new life, new hope, new dreams, new passion, new love that comes even in the times and the depths of despair, when everything seems bad, when everything is crashing down around us, when the boy we had a crush on doesn't like us, when we can't sit at anybody's table, when we're sick, when our bodies are falling apart, when we don't know what to do next, God draws good out of evil, life out of death, hope out of despair. This is what we're about, resurrection. So be Uncle Fred. Look for the times when we are a part of God's law, bringing healing and wholeness, and interpret God's law in those terms. Be humble. Be free. Hope. Hope always. Thanks be to God.